Welcome again. My name is Professor Cihan Çobanoğlu. I'm the president of Association of North America Higher Education International. I have here Professor Keith Barron with me. We are going to do this webinar, but before we start with this webinar, I would like to go over some of the basic information about ANAHEI as an organization. Let me just please share my screen with you. I hope that you are seeing my screen. We're going to do a quick housekeeping in 1 second. If you see the screen on the, I'm also checking on Facebook. Looks like it's working. Perfect. Keith Barron is going to talk to us about sexual harassment. The stakes continue to rise. That's the topic of today's webinar. As I told you, that I would like to just go over some quick housekeeping items. I see that many of you have already joined. Thank you so much for coming to today's webinar by ANAHEI. Just to quick, if you're connecting from a computer or from a mobile phone or from Facebook, you will not be able to do it. But if you're connecting from a desktop or laptop, please use the tools over here, raise hand. And this way, if you just please click on it, we are going to see if you are listening to us, if you are hearing us. I see that you are clicking on the raise hand, which is wonderful. That's perfect, perfect. Thank you so much. This shows that our sound is going to you nice and clear. I also would like to tell you that since this is a very hot topic that Professor Barron is going to lead us, if you have any questions, he prefers that he would like to take questions as he go along. So if you have any questions throughout this webinar, there is also a question and answer section here on your control panel. Please feel free to write your questions either to question and answer or chat button there. Similarly, if you are attending this seminar from Facebook, you can also write under the comment section. So I would like to also monitor those Facebook. I see that several people already joined the Facebook live session. So this is the housekeeping for this webinar. And in terms of ANAHEI as an organization, it's the mission of Association of North America Higher Education International as a non-profit organization is to promote and encourage a global culture at member institutions and globalize student and faculty successes, enhance global initiatives among member institutions. The information about ANAHEI can be found at ANAHEI website as anahei.org, as you can see on the screen. As I told you, I'm Professor Cihan Çobanoğlu. I'm the president of ANAHEI. Also, I serve as the McKibben Endowed Chair Professor and the director of M3 Center at the University of South Florida, Sarasota-Manatee. ANAHEI has different programs, just some of them, just to summarize, for those of you who may not be familiar with ANAHEI, we have Research in 3 Minutes program. This is a brand new program, and you can find the information again on ANAHEI website. We have Visiting Scholars program, Partnerships program. We published 2 journals, IBA Journal and Journal of Global Education and Research. These are open access journals, free to submit and free to access articles. We also have 6 or 7 different conferences. 2 of them, the upcoming one is Global Conference on Education Research. This is going to take place in 17-20 April in Las Vegas, and the other one is Global Conference on Business and Economics. This is going to take place on 4-8 June 2018. Excuse me. We have also awards and distinguished lecture series and webinars just like this one that you are seeing right now. You can see the recordings of all webinars that we have done so far, including this one, at anahei.org webinars website. Now it is my distinct pleasure to introduce you our speaker today. Professor Keith Barron is a person, besides being a great colleague of myself, but he's a great friend, personal friend. I've been working with him for over 7 years now. Let me please introduce him to you. Professor Barron is a graduate of Benjamin Cardozo School of Law, New York University's Preston Robert Tisch Center for Hospitality, Tourism, and Sports Management, the Culinary Institute of America, and is a member in good standing of the New York State Bar. Mr. Barron is currently an instructor too in the College of Hospitality and Tourism Leadership at the University of South Florida, Sarasota, Manatee, where I also work, where he has been a faculty member since January 2008. A former prosecutor from the Kings County District Attorney's Office, he prosecuted crime in the borough of Brooklyn, Trial Borough 5 Orange Zone, and conducted extensive investigations while preparing cases for trial, many of which obtained top count convictions. He worked closely with detectives and police officers from the New York Police Department on a case-by-case basis. During this time, Mr. Barron was also an adjunct instructor at New York University's Center for Law, Finance, and Taxation, where he taught legal writing and research, and the West Law training for a paralegal degree program affiliated New York University's School of Law. Mr. Barron's primary teaching focuses on the graduate and undergraduate hospitality law. The minimization of litigation is a stress through a preventive approach on how to limit liability while operating a hospitality business. I would like to give the floor to Professor Barron in 1 second, but he asked me to post a quick poll before he starts his presentation. As you can see from his resume, he is very qualified to this webinar here. I'm very, very happy to have him on board to do this. So I'm going to show the poll to you. For those of you, again, who are taking this in the desktops and laptops, please do, you should be able to see this question. This is only one question poll. It is anonymous. So I hope that you see the question. Have you or somebody you know have ever been a victim of sexual harassment? Again, this is unanimous. Please do respond, and I'm going to share the results with you in a few seconds. Okay, I think almost everybody has responded. I see that 70% of the audience who responded have said that I'm going to end the polling here and do share the results with you. And 70%, I don't know if you, for those of you who are viewing, you see 70% of you said that you or somebody you know has been a victim of sexual harassment. And 30% said no, which is good news for the 30%, but obviously not very good for the 70%. Without further ado, please join me. Welcome Professor Barron to this wonderful session. Keith?
Thank you very much, Jihan. Good morning from sunny Sarasota, Florida, where it's currently a brisk, for us anyway, 65 degrees Fahrenheit. I'd like to thank Dr. Chobanoglu and Ani for giving me the opportunity to speak with you a bit this morning about this very timely topic and timely issue. So what I'd like to do is put on my glasses, because I need them to see the screen, and share my PowerPoint with you.
Somebody said it's 7 degrees here.
7 degrees.
Yeah, one of the audience members.
Okay. All right. So, you know, we have seen in the last, I don't know, year or so, seemingly every other week or every week, someone else is in the news, the powerful, the rich, the popular, the unpopular, and it really has become an avalanche of just a sad story, a sad, sad state of affairs. So I want to talk a little bit this morning about some of these high-profile cases and then get into exactly what sexual harassment is and what it is not, and talk about some of the examples that not only are high-profile, but also having to do with hospitality and tourism. You know, this is a prolific problem, and I think that the that the poll we took shows that 70% is a pretty high number. So let's get into it. Please, if you have questions, I'm happy to take them as we go along. So, you know, some of the very high profile cases that you've seen, Roger Ailes unfortunately passed away last summer, but he was the CEO for Fox News, and he was forced out of office because of multiple allegations. Now, it's important to define what an allegation is. An allegation is simply an unproven statement, right? It's a statement made by somebody without having any evidence behind it. And, you know, a complaint, which is a pleading in the law and litigation, a complaint is simply a set of allegations, accusing, alleging that certain things happened, and they have to be proven in court by admissible evidence. The O'Reilly Factor was a very, very popular show. I'm sure all of you or many of you know or have heard of Bill O'Reilly. Bill O'Reilly, obviously very, very popular, former Fox News anchor, had the highest rated cable news show for many, many, many years running. You know, irrespective of your ideology, the guy was very, very successful. Also forced out after multiple allegations. You know, sexual harassment is not always about sex. Oftentimes it's about power and it's about authority. So let's take a look here. Huge payout settlements. The last one, $32 million, is simply very, very large.
Caution, you are about to enter the no spin zone.
Tonight, disgraced anchorman Bill O'Reilly is back in the news.
Tonight, I'm Bill O'Reilly.
According to a New York Times report, O'Reilly paid a $32 million settlement to Liz Wheel, a former Fox News analyst, often seen on his top-rated primetime show.
She worked with me for 7 years on the top rated.
The report alleges O'Reilly had a non-consensual sexual relationship with Wheel, repeatedly harassed her, and sent her gay pornography. In a statement released today, Fox admits it knew there was a settlement in January, but was informed by Mr. O'Reilly that he had settled the matter personally, adding the terms were confidential and not disclosed to the company. 1 month later, Fox extended O'Reilly's 4-year contract for $25 million a year.
At the time Fox re-signed Mr. O'Reilly, it knew about this settlement and was also trying to make the argument to the public, its employees, and its board that it had cleaned up workplace issues that had arisen under Roger Ailes.
This was the 6th payout made by O'Reilly or Fox to settle allegations against him. The company says the anchor's latest contract included a clause saying it could fire him if other allegations came up, which, in the end, Fox says it acted on when he was ousted in April. O'Reilly continues to maintain his innocence. His attorney is calling today's report a smear campaign. Last month, O'Reilly spoke to Matt Lauer.
You said at the time you did absolutely nothing wrong. Do you stand by that?
I do.
That I never mistreated anyone on my watch in 42 years.
6 prior payouts. 6 prior payouts. Ironically, Matt Lauer was also forced out subsequent to that interview. Very ironic. A serial harasser? I don't know. Maybe. Millions paid continues, $20 million paid by Fox News to protect and settle the case with Gretchen Carlson, who was also a popular anchor on the broadcast.
Fox News is set to pay $20 million to settle a lawsuit with former anchor Gretchen Carlson, 2 months after she accused her old boss, Roger Ailes, of sexual harassment. The network also offered Carlson a public apology. We sincerely regret and apologize for the fact that Gretchen was not treated with the respect and dignity that she and all of our colleagues deserve. On the same day, Fox announced longtime anchor Greta Van Susteren would be leaving the company. Carlson voluntarily dismissed her suit and made a statement saying, "I'm ready to move on to the next chapter of my life, in which I will redouble my efforts to empower women in the workplace." Roger Ailes resigned from his post in July after more women started coming forward with their own sexual harassment complaints against the media mogul. Another former Fox News host, Andrea Tantaros, filed her own lawsuit against the company and Ailes last month, claiming her boss also made sexually charged comments about her and her co-workers.
You know, the cost is not just in money. What a shakeup at the company. Greta Van Susteren, a very, very popular anchor for many, many, many years. And prior to that on CNN, if you remember the OJ coverage for the OJ trial, left because of this. So big, big shakeup at companies. Harvey Weinstein. Harvey Weinstein, obviously very, very big Hollywood producer. You know, we're going to go just through a couple of these, just a couple of more clips, which I think are very useful to set the scene here, set the stage. You know, the proverbial casting couch, it's just coming out time after time after time again, going back many, many decades of allegations and accusations. The classic quid pro quo sexual harassment, which we'll talk about a little later, you know, the this for that. You do this for me, I'll do that for you. Is he really a true serial sexual harasser? That's the question.
Tonight in the Harvey Weinstein scandal, a searing account from Oscar-winning actress Lupita Nyong'o about what she says were her troubling interactions with the movie producer. Here's ABC's Adrian Bankert again tonight.
And the Oscar goes to Lupita Nyong'o.
Tonight, Oscar winner Lupita Nyong'o coming forward with shocking allegations. The star actress penning an op-ed in the New York Times, saying she first met Harvey Weinstein while studying at Yale. He invited her to his home for a screening. With his children present, Nyong'o says he led her to his bedroom. Once there, he announced he wanted to give her a massage. In a panic, she offered to give him one. She says before long, he said he wanted to take off his pants. I told him not to do that and informed him that it would make me extremely uncomfortable. She says she feared her future could be in jeopardy, later agreeing to meet Weinstein in a New York City restaurant. Once there, he announced, "Let's cut to the chase. I have a private room upstairs where we can have the rest of our meal." He told me not to be so naive. If I wanted to be an actress, then I had to be willing to do this sort of thing. She refused and claims he became dismissive. "So we're done here," he said. "You can leave." This comes as another alleged victim speaks out. A distraught Heather Kerr recounting a meeting with Weinstein nearly 30 years ago where he allegedly exposed himself.
He told me that I was not that good looking, but that he would be willing to help me anyway. Like he was doing me a favor.
A lot of people get injured. A lot of people have been damaged, obviously, by sexual harassment. You know, it could be, we could spend hours and hours and hours just going over the number of celebrities, the number of well-known people, just in the past year or two, who have been accused of this behavior. Hollywood's been hit particularly hard. I think the question on a lot of people's lips, who's next?
Several media projects have been canceled or suspended due to allegations of sexual misconduct.
Welcome to CBS This Morning.
CBS fired Charlie Rose after 8 women accused him of sexual harassment. PBS said it will no longer distribute his show, and Bloomberg said it will no longer air the program. Rose said he does not believe all the allegations are accurate, but apologized for his inappropriate behavior. The release of the movie I Love You Daddy, written by and starring Louis C.K., was scrapped. 5 women came forward saying the comedian engaged in sexual misconduct. HBO then cut Louis C.K. from Night of Too Many Stars, America Unites for Autism programs. Netflix decided not to move forward with plans for another stand-up special with the comedian. In a statement, Louis C.K. said the accusations against him were true, that he is remorseful for his actions.
Of all the things I hold in high regard, rules are not one of them.
Production of House of Cards has been halted following sexual harassment accusations against Kevin Spacey. The actor will also no longer appear in Ridley Scott's forthcoming drama, All the Money in the World. Actor Anthony Rapp, members of the London theater community, and members of the House of Cards production staff are among those who have accused Spacey of sexual misconduct. In a statement, Spacey said he was, quote, beyond horrified by Rapp's allegations and did not remember the alleged incident, but apologized for what would have been, quote, deeply inappropriate drunken behavior. Brett Ratner released a statement that he is stepping back from his projects with Warner Brothers Studios. I don't want to have any possible negative impact to the studio until these personal issues are resolved. Ratner has been accused of sexual misconduct by 6 women, including actresses Olivia Munn and Natasha Henstridge.
There are a lot of interesting things here. And
MSNBC said that veteran journalist Mark Halperin would leave his role at the network and at NBC News. HBO said it will drop a miniseries associated with the journalist as well.
there's a lot of debates to go.
Halperin sexually harassed women while he was at ABC News, according to 5 women who spoke with CNN. In a lengthy statement, Halperin denied some of the allegations against him, adding, quote, I fully acknowledge and apologize for conduct that was often aggressive and crude.
Eric Bowling, you probably know me from the center seat on the 5 or what?
Fox canceled The Specialists after a report that host Eric Bowling sent lewd text messages to female coworkers. Bowling denied the allegations and is suing journalist Yashar Ali over the story.
My whole life I've been dressing up.
Jeffrey Tambor has said he may not return to Amazon Studios' Transparent after sexual harassment allegations. The idea that I would deliberately harass anyone is simply and utterly untrue. I don't see how I can return to Transparent. The allegations come from 2 of the actor's transgender colleagues. Nope.
You know, when we look at this and we see how prolific it really is, and it's sad. I love Charlie Rose. I love that show. I like Kevin Spacey. It's a very sad, sad thing. Companies are at risk too. Uber fired more than 20 people recently after 250 human resource claims forced the CEO out of office.
20 terminations at Uber after a law firm investigated 215 claims of sexual harassment, bullying, and inappropriate workplace behavior by current and former staff. The action sparked by former engineer Susan Fowler, who described repeated unwanted sexual advances by her boss in a February blog post. She said it was clear that he was trying to get me to have sex with him. When Fowler reported the incidents to Human Resources, she says they were swept under the rug and that her boss was called a high performer who management wouldn't feel comfortable punishing. Uber CEO Travis Kalanick immediately launched an investigation and said Fowler's claims were abhorrent and against everything Uber stands for and believes in, adding anyone who behaves this way or thinks this is okay will be fired. Kalanick later caught on camera losing his temper with his own Uber driver. More changes are expected. Former Attorney General Eric Holder is leading a separate investigation into the troubled culture at the 12,000-person company.
There's no organization in this company, and they didn't bother to put it into place.
Yesterday, Uber hired Harvard Business School professor Francis Fry to oversee an organizational transformation. CEO
All right, that's it on the clips. That's it on the clips. You know, we could spend a lot of time with these clips, but what's all this hubbub about? What exactly is sexual harassment? Why is it suddenly such a hot button item? How many people know who this person is? Recognize this person? Sure, there are a few. Anita Hill testified at the Clarence Thomas confirmation hearings back in 1991. Anita Hill worked with Clarence Thomas at the Department of Education prior to his nomination to the Supreme Court. It was quite gripping. I'm not going to get into the details of the specificity of what she said, but it was quite shocking. It was quite shocking. You can go look it up if you're interested. Obviously, she testified under oath. Clarence Thomas denied. He was obviously confirmed, and he actually replaced Thurgood Marshall's spot. Importantly, after this testimony, after this broadcast on live television, sexual harassment complaints filed with the EEOC, the Equal Opportunity Employment Commission here in the United States, doubled. And it was noticed that payouts from court settlements and out-of-court settlements increased. So this really put the spotlight on sexual harassment. Now, we'll look at a brief history. It's important to understand one thing, or a couple things. Up until 1986, there was really no legal framework as far as the Supreme Court was concerned for resolving sexual harassment complaints and lawsuits. In fact, as we'll see shortly, the term sexual harassment was not coined or created until 1975. But we know that going back centuries, females, okay, women, whether they were slaves in the South or whether they were domestic workers in the North, were at the mercy or hands of their masters/bosses. This is well known. This is not something we need to spend a lot of time with, but it's important to understand that this is not something that's brand new, obviously. By the early 20th century, women started to enter the workforce in manufacturing, clerical after the Industrial Revolution, but not in large numbers, obviously. Unions were there to protect them from doing incredibly demanding physical labor, but as far as dealing with bosses who made sexual favors, requests, demands, whatever you might want to say, propositions, I like the old term, if you can't stand the heat, get out of the kitchen, right? That's pretty much, they were saying, if you don't like it, quit your job. That's it. There was really no protection for women for decades. And it's important, we're talking about women here, but understand this, that the Supreme Court has found that same-sex sexual harassment is actionable, and women can harass men. So obviously it's not nearly as common, but if you look at the statistics with the EEOC, as far as claims filed and charges filed, you'll see that men filing charges alleging women sexual harassment from females has increased quite a bit in the last several years. But traditionally it was women, just like the Civil Rights Law of 1964 was often, it really was the racial issue, but it was really the African-American Caucasian relationship which sparked that. Complainers were told to stop whining. Complainers were told if you were complaining about a boss who was trying to get you to have sex with him, trying to get a favor from you, they dismissed this as a trivial and harmless thing, that, you know what, boys will be boys. Suck it up. This is what they were told. Bob Dylan has a song, right? The times they are a-changing. The times they are a-changing. In the 60s and 70s, this time started to change. More women started to enter the workforce. The stay-at-home housewife mother became less and less common. You needed two incomes to make the same quality of life that you once were able to do with one income. So what did that mean? That meant that women started to flood the workforce in a venue that was traditionally male-dominated in many, many respects. We're going to see, look, they used to be called firemen. Now they're firefighters. It was workmen's compensation. Now it's workers' compensation. We've moved to a gender-neutral world. But there are industries where behavior was very, very common. We're going to see this, that is no longer acceptable. So the turning point came in the early 70s with the Equal Rights Amendment, with the women's lib movement. We're not here to debate all that, but look, sexual harassment, it wasn't even on the landscape. That phrase didn't exist until 1975, and it was at Cornell University. That's where it was created, with a woman named CARMITA Wood. CARMITA Wood was an administrative assistant to a professor at Cornell, a nuclear physicist, a man who had worked on the Manhattan Project. And she was subject to sexual harassment. She was harassed to the point where she requested a transfer. And Cornell denied. Cornell denied, and subsequently she left because she couldn't take it anymore. A few months later, she filed for unemployment benefits citing personal reasons, and it was denied again. You know, it's important to understand when we see there will be two types of sexual harassment we're going to talk about, quid pro quo and hostile work environment. When there's a hostile work environment that's created, it's not one incident, okay? It's usually an aggregate or a number of things that occur over a long period of time. And it makes the employee, it makes the victim dread coming to work. He or she will never know what's coming next. They know something's coming, but they won't know what it is. They won't know when it's coming. And it becomes very, very serious, both physically and emotionally for the person. So Cornell denies her benefits. Cornell denies everything. And what does she do? Well, you know what she does? Let's form a movement. Let's become an activist. Working Women United. They created, a bunch of women got together at Cornell. They said, you know what? We're going to have a speak out. We're going to get together and we're going to invite women from all different professions, businesses, factories. And just like we did this poll, we're going to see how common is this? Because you know what? It's embarrassing. I think a lot of people don't come forward because it's embarrassing, and they're embarrassed by it. They're embarrassed by it. And that's what they found. You know what? They had secretaries. They had clerks, filmmakers. They had factory workers. They had waitresses. They had all sorts of people. And it was incredible how much support they received. This is the flyer for the first sexual harassment speak out in 1975. It was an activist movement. It was well needed. It was done at Cornell, and the country started to take notice. The country started to take notice. And it was the New York Times that first printed the phrase sexual harassment. On August 19th, 1975, New York Times reprinted the article, and it was the first time, like I say, it was used in print. That prompted REDBOOK the following year, which REDBOOK is a very popular American women's magazine. It's been around since the very early 20th century. It's still around. And REDBOOK did a survey in 1976. They sent out a survey. We did a little survey in the beginning. They did a big survey. And here it is. There's the big survey. What did they find? What do you think? How many percentage? 80% of respondents. Not far off from what we just did. I was not shocked to see the 70% number. 80% of respondents said they experienced sexual harassment on the job. Not that they know somebody, or I know a guy who knew a guy who knows a guy. They experienced it. 1980, who is it? Hollywood gets involved. 9 to 5. Anybody ever see the movie 9 to 5 made in 1980 about sexist bosses dealing with having to work as a female in a male-dominated arena? So Hollywood got involved. All right. What is sexual harassment? What is this sexual harassment? Well, let's look at what it's not. What it's not, because the media, the public, have used terms synonymously when they should not have. It is not sexual assault. What is sexual assault? Sexual assault, I'm not going to get too graphic, but sexual assault is forcible, unwanted sexual contact. Forcible, unwanted sexual contact. Rape, sodomy, groping, forcible. The difference between burglary and robbery. They're both larceny. Robbery is forcible theft. I stick out a gun and I hold it to you, give me your wallet. That's robbery. Somebody breaks into your house and takes your television, that's burglary. Even though people say, oh yeah, my house was robbed. It's not possible. Same thing here, sexual assault is forcible, unwanted sexual contact. That is not sexual harassment. Sexual misconduct, you see this phrase thrown around all the time as well. probably a little more accurately, sexual misconduct is the broad umbrella. Okay, sexual misconduct is a catch-all term. It's the house within which sexual assault lives. It's the house within which sexual abuse lives, which is often sexual abuse is usually a domestic, in-house term. Sexual harassment is more work-related. And it's also the umbrella under which sexual harassment lives. So sexual misconduct can include many, many, many things. Sexual harassment. Let's take a close look at it. Okay, and we have a little bit of legalese here, a little bit of legal stuff, but we'll talk over it. It's important to put it in there. You'll see some citations to cases. It's important to cite cases that are very relevant and important. There are two types of sexual harassment. The most important word in this little definition is unwelcome. Unwelcome, and we'll get back to that later. Unwelcome sexual advances, requests for favors, verbal, physical harassment of a sexual nature. That explicitly or implicitly affects an individual's employment. So we're going to look, what does that mean exactly? It unreasonably interferes with their performance. They can't sleep at night. Because they can't sleep at night, they do a really poor job at work. It intimidates. It's offensive. Two types. We got quid pro quo. Quid pro quo is simply Latin. This for that, something for something. It's in classic in contract law. We go over this quite a bit. I'll do this if you give me that. I promise to do that if you promise to do this. I'll do that if you do this. It's very, very simple. This for that. In the sexual harassment arena, it is traditionally a person in power with authority over a subordinate. Usually the subordinate is female. Doesn't have to be. Usually the person in power is a male. And usually it will involve a tangible employment action. So something, whether it's a raise, a promotion, a vacation, training to become, to take a higher position in the company, hiring, threat of firing, it can go on and on and on. Tangible employment action that results from a refusal to submit to that supervisor's sexual demands. There's a very important case from the US Supreme Court in 1998. So what is intangible employment action? We just talked about it a little bit. You know, some of these examples that I found, I'll quickly run through them, and I have the citations here for you. But Barbara Clarks was a billing clerk at Pilot Freight Trucking Company in Georgia, and she has a supervisor, like we all do. We all have bosses, supervisors. John Long shows up as the regional supervisor, and he starts in with the traditional, you know, let me brush up against you, let me rub your shoulders for you, which, you know, maybe is not really, seems kind of innocuous at first. But he keeps doing it, and he asks her, you know what, I'd like to come over to your house this evening with a bottle of red wine. How does that sound? She says, no, I don't want you to come over. Thank you, but no, thank you. He gets on the loudspeaker, the public address system, and he announces, this is your last chance. You better be nice to me. Your fate is in my hands. Revenge is the name of the game. Over the loudspeaker, so all of the colleagues hear it, everybody hears it. Obviously, she's then fired for saying no to him and runs this action. In the hospitality industry, which is what I'm involved with, you know, look, I've worked in a lot of kitchens in my life, some very nice and big and some very, very small. And you put 4, 5, 6 people in a small kitchen and you're in the middle of a busy rush, and you've got males and females and you're in your 20s or 30s, things can happen and people get touched and people are upset.
Keith.
Yes.
One person asked this question: will you speak to third-party harassment, cases where you are disadvantaged because of preferred treatment of a coworker based on a relationship, affair, or QPQ situation?
So let me make sure I understand the question correctly, that the person is not necessarily directly the victim of harassment, but they're being harassed because they're in a relationship with a co-worker?
Yes, like a co-worker is having an affair with the boss. So the person never has to work weekends, get better assignments, and get promotions, and you do not.
Yeah, that would not necessarily be sexual harassment. That goes to favorable treatment. I think that's what you're talking about here, favorable treatment, and whether or not that's equitable in the workplace. I think that's a different issue than what we're talking about here, sexual harassment, where we're talking about actual favors and being bestowed upon a worker in exchange for something else. You know, that's something that the person would have to take to human resources and deal with, I think.
So that's not sexual harassment, this particular case there?
I don't believe so.
Okay, thank you.
Here we have a restaurant waitress at the Top Notch Family Restaurant, and the owner began touching her at work, kept touching her, making suggestive comments. Then he offered her $100 to have sex. Now she accepted. She accepted, and twice she did. But then she said no more. And he said, you know what, if you don't continue to sleep with me, you're gonna lose your job. Classic quid pro quo. Doesn't matter that she began a consensual, maybe welcomed, who knows? Maybe she just wanted the money, I don't know. But the fact of the matter is, once it became unwelcome and the threat was made, it became a quid pro quo sexual harassment case. She was subsequently fired. Another one. Here we have Best Western Hotel, and we have a same-sex issue. We have the front desk agent, Fred Wu, with the front desk supervisor, David Turner. Again, these cases are all public. So the cases in the litigation and case law is public information. It's all public knowledge. They were admitted homosexual males. They became attracted to each other and began a consensual, welcome sexual relationship. Later on, Mr. Wu, the front desk agent, said, I don't want to do this anymore. I'm done. Ended the relationship. Mr. Turner said, no, I don't want that to happen. What did he do? He retaliated by drastically reducing Mr. Wu's hours at the front desk, and he filed a written notice of discipline, which substantively did not really have merit, forced plaintiff to resign, forced Mr. Wu to resign, and he brought this action. Another one involves the city of Dundee and a police dispatcher, female police dispatcher, chief of police in this city of Dundee, Florida, repeatedly asked her to have sexual relations with him, suspended her when she said no, suspended her on the pretext that she violated office policy by bringing food into the dispatch room, but that had never been enforced before. He then made it clear that if she did not have sex with him, he would not help her get into the police academy. So you see a pattern emerging here. Last one we'll look at was at a Sheraton hotel, just north of Miami. Sales representatives Amy Virgo was hired as a sales rep. This is quite a fascinating case, especially to people in the industry. Within 3 months of starting, she was the general manager. Now that alone kind of raises my antennae, as they say. Mr. Jones, Hugh Jones, was the president of the operating company that was operating the Sheraton. And he said, you know, look, you have intercourse with me, or I will write disparaging reviews about you. And so she succumbed to pressure. And 4 times she had sexual relations with him. 5 months after taking the GM post, she resigned. So you see that these are quid pro quo. These are particularly egregious types of sexual harassment, but they're not the most common. They're not the most common, and they actually are declining. The other type, hostile work environment, is not declining. And this is by far the most common form of sexual harassment that we see. It is lots of gray areas. It doesn't even have to involve sex. If I bring in gifts day after day after day to your secretary, your administrative assistant, she's a nice, young blonde, and I bring her some flowers. The next day I bring her a sweater. The next day I bring her perfume. Excessive gift giving that makes her feel uncomfortable can create a hostile work environment. Repeatedly asking her out for dates. Repeatedly, she says no, and I keep asking, and I keep asking, and I keep asking. Look, I went to the CIA. I can cook great. Please let me cook dinner for you. If I ask her 6, 7, 8 times in a row, and she keeps saying no, that could cross the line into sexual harassment, hostile work environment. What are some of the things? Obviously, it doesn't, look, here we have a list of possibilities. If I tell a crude joke, and I know that there are females within earshot, and I'm telling my buddy here, and I do this day after day after day, and I subject a female or females to my crude, lewd jokes, even if I didn't intend for them to hear it or I'm not doing it on purpose, it could create a hostile work environment. Look, how can a victim...
One question here.
Yeah.
One viewer is asking, if you make a joke, let's say sexual joke, and then you don't know the staff member's behavior, if they don't like it and they report you, are you liable for sexual harassment case if this is the first time you've done it?
No, and that's important to understand, that hostile work environment, it needs to be repeated. In other words, it needs to be an ongoing source of hostility. Believe it or not, and we're going to get to it in a minute, but there have been cases where one incident of the boss exposing himself to a female, exposing himself and asking for oral sex, believe it or not, the courts have held that one incident was not sufficient to create a hostile work environment. So, again, some courts might say it is, but there are cases clearly out there where that is just not enough. Now, if it's a repeated thing, it has to be a course of conduct, is what the law says. It's a course of conduct over a period of time.
Thank you.
And, yeah. Some of the reactions, obviously, look, distraction, inability to work, anger, anxiety. The anxiety is huge, and the depression that people feel because they dread coming to work. They have to pay the bills. They can't quit their job. They feel like they can't. And it's it can be a very, very serious thing to the victim. How do we know if a hostile work environment really exists? Like I said, the courts look to the totality of the circumstances. They look to the aggregate. They look at the whole picture, not just one or two things. How frequent is it occurring? How varied is the conduct? How severe is it? Is it truly offensive? And, does it really interfere with the employee's work performance? All of these things have to be present, and this is very common in the law. When we look at whether somebody's an employee or an independent contractor, we don't look at one thing. We look at several things. Does the employer provide the tools? How's the person paid? How much control over the job is there? Same thing with private clubs. Is it a private club or not? There are many, many different criteria legally that's looked at. Same thing with the hostile work environment. Many different criteria that's looked at to determine whether or not it really exists. So here are some examples. And let's take a look very quickly at these. Jacksonville shipyards. Okay, now I can't think of a more male-dominated profession than shipbuilding. Okay, how many female welders are there out there that are building ships? Not many at all. But Lewis Robinson was one in 1977, so a long time ago. From 77 to 88, She was a welder in Jacksonville. What did she have to see every day? Pictures of nude and partially nude women posted throughout the factory, throughout the workplace. Vendors that would send advertising calendars. Sports Illustrated, the Sports Illustrated calendar. I don't have that on my wall. Okay, I don't think any of my colleagues have that on their walls either. You know, vendors' advertising calendars distributed to the employees and free to post them in the workplace. Importantly, the court noted there were never pictures of nude men posted. Very interesting. And I found this one really interesting. The shipyard banned magazines and newspapers on the job. They were prohibited. However, male employees were allowed to read pornographic magazines in the workplace without any sanction. This kind of behavior, allowing this culture to exist, coming from the top down, is a classic example of a hostile work environment. Let's go to the next one here because I don't want to go too long with this. You know, look, in the hospitality industry again, Carla Nabe was a waitress at the Big Boy restaurant in Monroe, Pennsylvania. Kevin Humbrecht was the restaurant manager. He liked the way she looked. She began in August of '93. One day he calls her up at home, says, you know, can you come in early today, please? I need you to come in for a shift. Okay. She comes in. He says, now, were you having sex with your fiance when I called you this morning? And he started in, he just would not let up on her. And this continued and continued, as you can see, specifically here, what he did over a course of time, which obviously got him into some trouble. Last one, then we'll move on. This one was particularly bad. Over 16 months, this owner, actually was a couple that owned this restaurant in Louisiana. And again, the plaintiff was a waitress or a server, a female server as we call them now. Not really, I guess, right to say waitress or waiter. So female server, but back then waitress. And this guy really liked the way she looked, you know, he really did. And he constantly 5 to 10 comments about the size of her breasts, grabbed her rear end 3 to 4 times, even exposed himself asking for oral sex. She went to him and said she was pregnant. She needed a larger shirt. And they went back to his office, at which time he, again, propositioned her, and to the point where she became very uncomfortable. Now, you can see how people would be, if this would go on 16 months of this, it's a long time. That's enough time for all sorts of physical and emotional ailments to set in. Probably one of the most egregious cases I've ever read about was the Mitsubishi case. 1996, the EEOC filed a complaint against Mitsubishi for in an Illinois factory. The stuff that was going on there, you got to read about it. You ought to look it up and read about it if you're interested. Between 88 and 93, management, quote, training, including sending managers and managers in training to sex shows, having sex parties in hotels, and sex with prostitutes in hotels. This, quote, culture, then they brought it back to the factory. They would take pictures of these parties and they would send them around to the women who were working in the factory. There was sexual graffiti everywhere. Many of the women factory workers were threatened, stalked, and menaced. Mitsubishi ended up paying $34 million in 1998, which was a lot of money back then, to 300 female factory workers. Very, very bad case. So, I said earlier that unwelcome conduct was the buzzword. And when I talk to my students about sexual harassment, you know, we go through unwelcome, and we talk about the fact that unwelcome does not equal consent, does not equal voluntary. And if you think about it, it's true. In fact, one of the most important cases that we're going to look at from 1986, the landmark case, the case that said sexual harassment is clearly violative of Title VII of the Civil Rights Act of 1964 is an actionable offense. No means no, all right? No means no, obviously. Is it possible that a man or a woman could have sex with a supervisor, not wanting to, but being afraid that they might lose their job, being fearful that they'll lose their benefits, that they'll lose their health insurance, that they won't be able to pay their mortgage? Yes, it is. In fact, that is exactly what the 1986 case was about, which we're going to look at in a minute. No means no, okay? All of these different reasons or possibilities for someone to continue to engage in a sexual relationship does not mean that it's welcome. Very, very important. How do we know? And yeah.
Just one, one comment from a viewer. It's not a question, but I just want to read it. These cases are also disturbing and only muddy the water for the real victims of sexual misconduct. Duke lacrosse team case and the Amherst Falls rape case.
Yeah, no, that's absolutely true. That's absolutely true. I mean, look, we can go back decades. I mean, I lived in New York City for decades. The Central Park jogger case, you know, that was a horrible, horrible thing. That was a horrible thing where this woman was jogging in Central Park in the 80s and she was assaulted. She was attacked. She was attacked and raped by a gang of young students, of young people, not students. But there were people who were wrongly charged. And I actually used to work for an attorney that represented one of the accused who was wrongly accused and was subsequently exonerated. But yeah, no, it does muddy the water. I agree. Human nature, though, you know what? Are we supposed to be like robots? I don't know.
Of course.
Go ahead, Jihan.
No, absolutely. Please finish. I've got a couple of more questions.
Sure. Are we supposed to be like robots? We're men. We're women. We live in a society where we have to deal with day-to-day interactions and day-to-day relationships. You know, we got to look at the distinction between these four things. Invited. I invite you to come and let's go do something behind the mulberry bush. Uninvited but welcome. Oh, wow, I didn't know that was going to happen, but yeah, I'm all for it. Let's go. Offensive but tolerated. I don't want to lose my job. I got to deal with this. Or flatly rejected. We got to look at the distinction between these. Go ahead, Gina.
Keith, there's two questions. One of them is political, but I'm going to ask because the viewer has asked, how do you think the nation will behave when the leader of the country is the chief harasser?
Because it's the office of the presidency of the United States of America, I'd love nothing more than to talk about this, and I could talk about it for hours and hours, and I will talk about it with you. I'd love to once he is out of office. So when he is out of office, let's bring this issue back up. But until then, I'm not going to go down that road right now.
Okay, thank you. Another one, do the cases of sexual harassment need to be proved? Can a staff member just blame a manager just to do it?
You know, this is the threat. I mean, this is the issue. I mean, can it be proven? Yeah, it can be, but it might be difficult. It would have to be proven through evidence in a court of law, which would be testimony and judging credibility of the witnesses. Perhaps there's physical evidence, but probably not. Maybe there's witnesses. Can it be done? Is it done? This is all up for debate. I mean, might it be easy to jump on the bandwagon if you are in a position to do so and accuse somebody? You know, look, these settlements, and we're going to look at non-disclosure agreements at the end of this presentation, but these settlements are made before these things go to court, these are made to make them go away. So if you're going to accuse somebody, if you're going to allege that somebody did something, you know, once the horse is out of the barn, it's kind of hard to get him back in. And, you know, you're not guilty until you're convicted and you're proven guilty beyond a reasonable doubt. But yet when somebody is arrested and there's a clip or a soundbite of that person being put into a police car handcuffed, most people think he or she did it. So we have to be very, very careful with the allegations and accusations, because it destroys careers, destroys families, and destroys lives. Title VII, 1986 decision of Meritor. This is the case that I was talking about. We'll talk about it very quickly. It wasn't until the late 70s that cases began appearing in lower federal courts. Remember, it wasn't until 1975 that sexual harassment was even on the landscape. The term didn't even exist. 1980, the EEOC issued guidelines, which were very, very important. Remember, the EEOC is the administrative agency that is the gatekeeper of all employment issues and all workplace employment issues. And as a potential litigant, you must do something called exhaust administrative remedies. When there's a possible administrative remedy, you must first exhaust that possibility before you can proceed to court. And it would be federal court here, because you're dealing with a potential violation of a federal statute. So 1986, the Meritor Savings Bank was the landmark decision. What is a landmark decision for all of you out there? You know, I'm sure, Brown v. Board of Education from the 50s, which declared separate but equal Jim Crow laws unconstitutional, and that school segregation was unconstitutional, ended almost 65 years of separate but equal, which was not equal, as we know. Roe v. Wade, the woman's right to choose. These are landmark decisions, whether you agree with them or not. They are landmark cases, as is Meritor Savings Bank, because it was the first Supreme Court case that actually recognized and said that Title VII does indeed prohibit sexual harassment, and it is a form of illegal sex discrimination. So what was Meritor about anyway? Well, there's a citation in case you want to go read the whole decision. Really what the court did was they affirmed, or they agreed with, the basic premise that the EEOC guidelines stated. And they said, yes, there are basically two types, quid pro quo and hostile work environment. So it really did go through and affirm what the EEOC had been saying for several years. What are the facts? Vinson Michelle Vinson was a teller hired by Mr. Taylor, the bank manager, in 1974. She went through training. After her training, she was invited out to dinner. He suggested they go to a motel. She denied, but then subsequently she agreed out of fear for her job. This lasted for 3 to 4 years. They had intercourse 40 to 50 times. Now I know that there are probably people out there who are saying 3 to 4 years, that's just crazy. How can that possibly be? What do you think the bank's defense was? Well, first of all, Taylor and the bank flatly denied ever having sex with her. But the bank's defense essentially was, if the sex did occur, if there was a sexual relationship, it was voluntary. Well, what does that say? We looked at sexual assault before. Sexual assault is forcible sexual relations. Rape is forcible penetration. Vaginal penile penetration, forcible. Well, yeah, if it wasn't voluntary, it would have been involuntary, and it would have been sexual assault. It would have been rape. Well, it wasn't rape. Clearly, it was not rape. The lower district court agreed and held it was voluntary. So the federal court system, first you have your trial court, your district court, where you have the jury and so forth, and the trial goes on. In that court, the first court to hear it, they agreed with the bank. They said it was voluntary. There's no violation here whatsoever. Well, it made it to the Court of Appeals. That's the next step up. The Court of Appeals is a regional appeals court just below the US Supreme Court. And what the Court of Appeals did was the Court of Appeals basically said, you know what, you got to look at the distinction between unwelcome and voluntary, and they reversed it back. So now you have a discrepancy. Supreme Court granted certiorari, which means they agreed to hear the case, which most cases are not granted cert. Supreme Court affirmed, and what did they hold? Their answer, in part, is that the proper inquiry focuses on the unwelcomeness, not really a word, but Supreme Court printed it, so it's good enough for me. Unwelcomeness of the conduct rather than the voluntariness of the victim's participation. That is what it comes down to. Is it unwelcome? Doesn't matter if it's consensual. Consent does not equal unwelcome. As far as the duration, the court was very specific to point out that any sexual relationship between a supervisor and a subordinate is suspect, period. It's suspect for being unwelcome, regardless of the duration. 3 to 4 days, 3 to 4 months, 3 to 4 years, the court said it doesn't matter. Doesn't matter. So now that we hopefully know what sexual harassment is, how have these allegations and accusations and lawsuits been disposed of? And why 80% through REDBOOK, 70% with you guys? How come this hasn't been all over the news? How come this hasn't been forever covered? Non-disclosure agreements. Non-disclosure agreements. Now, this is nothing new. These are nothing new. Very, very common in settlements. If you like the Beatles, George Harrison was sued in 1971 because his hit song, My Sweet Lord, they said that he copied it from a song by the Shirelles in the 50s called He's So Fine. He was in litigation for 5 or 6 years in the 70s, even wrote a song called Sue Me, Sue You Blues. Finally, the case was settled in 1976, and it was completely sealed, non-disclosure, don't know how much he paid, don't know any of the details. Very, very common. Oftentimes, employers will insist that this is a condition for settling out of court because they don't want their dirty laundry aired. Even the existence of the NDA itself can be kept secret. These are strict confidentiality provisions. So the question becomes, and it's a debate, are these good? Should they be allowed? If the victim who is given the money agrees and then they break it, they breach it, it's a contract, they breach it, then they got to give the money back. So critics of it say, look, it promotes a culture of secrecy. I think it does. I mean, doesn't it enable? Does it enable or not? It muzzles the victims. It enables potential serial predators to persist. No one has knowledge of any prior allegations or prior facts. Their past deeds are shielded. Is it enabling? Look at Bill O'Reilly. $32 million paid to Lise Wheel. Now, if you remember the factor, Lise Wheel was a constitutional law professor. Lise Wheel was a smart cookie. I like her. I'm shocked. I'll be honest with you, I'm shocked. I was shocked. And the fact that he paid there were 6 prior settlements in the 7 figures. You go back and look, because he has a lot of money. Recently, bills have been introduced in 3 states, California, New York, and Pennsylvania, to ban non-disclosure agreements in sexual harassment settlement cases only. Because understand, these things are used all the time. These things are used all the time. Do you know this? Do you know the formula for Coca-Cola? If you know, let me know. Please send it to me. I wanted to send it to my email. Or how about the secret recipe for KFC's crust? These are trade secrets, right? These are intellectual property trade secrets. And these things are protected, very vehemently protected by their rightful owners. And so if you work for Coca-Cola, if you work for a company that uses or has trade secrets, you're gonna have to sign one of these things, period. They're used in employment contracts. When you join, when you leave or you're fired, you're gonna have to deal with these. Employment lawyers say, look, it's not hush money, quote, because first of all, I mean, $32 million to lease wheel. Now, maybe there are people out there saying, look, for $32 million, you can harass me too. But you don't know what she went through. On the other side, say, look, she wasn't forced to settle. No one forced her to settle. No one forced her to sign an NDA. She didn't have to do it. Should they be banned? On the one side, you know, you're gagging speech that may be of a public concern, that may have consequences, that the general public has a right to know. And the victims themselves, they may want the details to remain confidential. You know, I tell my class, I said, look, this is the law. These cases are not edited for political correctness. You're gonna read things in here, you're gonna see words that are offensive, it's the way the law is, and the details are specific and explicit. And victims may not want this. Yes.
Kid, one more question. So NDAs are not admissible in future cases?
When you say admissible in future cases, so NDAs by their very nature, like I said, the existence of them may actually be secret. So the fact that there is an NDA may be able to come out, but their substantive information cannot be used. That's the whole idea. Is that you know, they'll pay these large amounts of money to make sure that the truth, the light of day, doesn't see the light of day.
Thanks.
So should they be banned? Victims may want the details to remain confidential, but on the other side, if we force disclosure, if a settlement will always have all of the details out, is that gonna result in fewer settlements and smaller settlements? It makes sense, because why would somebody pay $32 million when they know that it's gonna be aired throughout the entire globe?
A follow-up to the previous question, does a plaintiff's lawyer know about them in a future case? NDA?
Plaintiff's lawyer will not know about them because they are not public knowledge. They're not part of any court file. They're not going to be. They're not going to know about them. You know, sometimes things leak. The $32 million settlement with Lease Wheel was supposed to be a non-disclosure agreement. Somehow it leaked out. I don't believe she violated it, but no, subsequent plaintiffs and their attorneys are not going to know about it. And that's people who want them banned, sides that want them banned say this is part of the problem, is that that future victims and future plaintiffs could have been protected had they known. So why does somebody pay the big bucks? Well, they want to avoid career destruction, obviously, and they want to minimize the personal embarrassment that comes along. Oftentimes, these are just paid to make it go away. But on the other hand, it may enable, if somebody has all the money in the world, if they got monopoly money, and for some reason this is their character, this is what they do, it's going to make it probably much more likely that they'll do it again, knowing that they'll just be able to pay and enter into an NDA. You know, this is a very, very debatable thing. We could have a whole webinar just on this issue. Well, look, Thank you very much. Questions, comments, suggestions, always welcome. I'd love to speak further with you about this and even the political question, which I knew I was going to get, and I thank you for that. I'd love to have the opportunity to talk about that when the time is right. I want to thank ANITA again and Jihan for giving me the chance to just share some thoughts about this topic. Any other questions?
Yes, Keith, thank you so much. This was a great discussion. I really appreciate it. I have a couple of more questions. Somebody from Facebook, I'm going to read. It's a statement more than a question, but let's see how it goes. One audience member from Africa: how can women be encouraged to come out in a workplace where they don't feel encouraged to report sexual harassment? My question is based on African countries. I've noticed that it is very difficult to come out. At times, they are encouraged to report to the authorities, but the authorities do not seem to be doing anything. So people just feel like they will be wasting their time before, therefore, just give up on these requests.
That's a great question. That's a really good question. And remember, we have to choose. We have to look at the distinction between the workplace and dealing with authorities with respect to the law and crimes. But what I would say, and we didn't have time to really get into this, but there is an affirmative defense that employers can use with respect to a hostile work environment. And part of that is being proactive, having an anonymous reporting program in place and making it as comfortable as possible for victims to come forward, knowing that they will not be, that everything will be, strict anonymity will be adhered to, and that, you know, the company looks at it very seriously. And you'll see that. I mean, companies now are very, very proactive in training and trying to school, especially older male workers, about the changes in society.
Great, thank you. I have two more questions quickly. I think there's more coming up. People are thanking you. Will you be sharing the presentation? How can I get a copy? If you are comfortable, Keith, sharing the presentation, we can put on ANAHEI website, and I will, obviously, we will email, at least the recording will be emailed to everybody, but the slides, I will refer that to Professor Barron.
Absolutely, anytime.
Great, we will make it. Another question. Most of the examples that you gave is regarding females. Are you familiar with any sexual harassment cases regarding males? Is that seen less as a sexual harassment?
It is a lot less. Like I said, that the most recent statistic that I remember when I looked at the EEOC for 2016 charges filed, it was about 16.4%. So 16.4% of sexual harassment claims were made by men. Obviously, the balance by women. Look, I don't have any specific facts in my head, but you know, I mean, I could make some up if you're interested.
Great, thank you, Keith. I have one more question.
Also, one other thing, I see a typo in my phone number. It's 359-4449.
Okay. So I will fix that in a second here. Just a second. I'm gonna show that to people, the right number for. Another question: can only verbal remarks constitute sexual harassment?
Yes, absolutely. Verbal remarks can absolutely constitute let's look at hostile work environment first. If the verbal remarks occur over a period of time and they're sufficiently severe and offensive, absolutely they can. Does not take any physical contact whatsoever. And obviously, quid pro quo, it's pretty much all verbal because it's a request or something like that in exchange for a favor.
Wonderful. That's all, Keith. I would like to thank you again, and also would like to show your contact information on the screen. Again, is correct. Also, I would like to thank the audience members for their participation and wonderful questions. Just want to remind the viewers that we have several more webinars that's coming up just on January 23rd. Dr. Yubo Chan from Tsinghua University, which is the top university in China. He will talk about digital transformation of Chinese markets. And on the January 25th, we will have also Professor Farzana, Crafting Literature Review. She's going to talk about that. Last but not least, on February 22nd, Dean Anil Makhija from Ohio State University's College of Business. He will talk about the middle market. Back to, again, Dr. Barron, Professor Barron, I appreciate, again, your time. Also, if you have any questions, further questions, please note that this will be viewed on ANAHEI website and Facebook many more times after it's posted. If you have any questions, please feel free to contact Professor Barron at the screen here. Let me just bring that contact information one more time. K. Barron at sar.usf.edu, and his phone number 941-3459-4449. Obviously, that's US +1. That's the country code. Have a wonderful day. Okay, sorry.
I want to just thank Jihan again, and honored to be included in the same company as all of these wonderful, wonderful professionals. And thank you for allowing me to do this. And please call me anytime with questions, comments, or suggestions. I'm always happy to talk.
Wonderful. Thank you again. Have a wonderful day, night, evening, depending on where you are. We look forward to seeing you in more ANAHEI events in the future. Great. Thank you.
Thank you.